All right, buckle up, everyone, because today we're diving headfirst into a true classic. A game that, well, let's face it, if you're here, you probably already know and love. That's right, we're talking Midnight Club 3.
Oh, yeah. This one's special. I mean, think about it. Back in the early 2000s, the racing game scene was already jam-packed.
Totally. You had, like, Need for Speed doing its thing with, crazy cop chases and all that, and then Burnout was blowing everyone's minds with those insane over-the-top crashes.
Right. Big names, huge franchises. But then, out of nowhere, Rockstar, the studio behind, well, Grand Theft Auto, drops Midnight Club 3, and everything changes.
It's true. They kind of just swooped in and redefined what a street racing game could be. So what was it about Midnight Club 3 that made it stand out from all those other big hitters?
Well, think about those early 2000s racers for a second. Most of them, they catch you on a track, right? Like you
Yeah.
pick your car, you pick your track, and you race. Simple.
Yeah, pretty standard formula.
Exactly. But Midnight Club 3, it said, nah, we're going to do things differently. And they went from those closed tracks to a completely open world experience.
Boom. Game changer.
Absolutely. Suddenly you weren't just racing, you were exploring, discovering shortcuts, learning the city. It was a whole new level of freedom.
Yeah, and we're not just talking about any cities, right?
Yes.
Midnight Club 3 threw you into San Diego, Atlanta, and Detroit.
And they weren't just, basic tracks modeled after those cities. These were full-blown, detailed, explorable cities.
No invisible walls, no limits, just pure open road freedom.
Exactly. And, the game just hit different at night. They really nailed that whole underground street racing vibe, all those neon lights, the cityscapes, the feeling of like pushing your car to the limit under the cover of darkness. It was special.
It totally was. And all of that open world, it wasn't just a cool backdrop, right? It was like woven into the core of the game.
Right. It wasn't just a visual thing. It was like integral to how you played the game, how you raced. You had to learn the city, find shortcuts, master those streets.
It gave you this incredible feeling of like ownership. Like you weren't just racing in a city, you were owning the city.
Yeah.
And that feeling, it went beyond just the world, right? Because Midnight Club 3, it also gave you this insane level of customization.
Oh, yeah. The customization was next level. It wasn't just picking a paint job. You were building your dream car from the ground up. Body kits, spoilers, neon lights, custom paint jobs. They had it all. And, this is back when licensed car parts were starting to appear in games. And Midnight Club 3, with its DUB magazine tie-in, it was right there on the cutting edge.
It totally was. It was like they took everything from the real-world tuning scene and crammed it into the game.
But here's the best part. All those upgrades, they weren't just for show. They actually changed how your car handled. Oh, yeah. Big time. You couldn't just slap on the shiniest parts and expect to win. You had to think strategically about your build. Like, did you want a speed demon, a drift king, a grippy corner carver? Every choice you made in the garage mattered.
It made you really think about your car,
Yeah.
understand how each part impacted its performance. It was deep.
It was. And then you had the racing itself, man. Midnight Club 3, it found that sweet spot between over-the-top arcade action, and handling that felt, surprisingly realistic.
Totally. It had that arcade-style fun, but also this sense of weight, of momentum that made each car feel distinct.
Yeah, it was like every car had a personality. And you had to learn to drive each one differently. A nimble sports car handled way different than a heavy muscle car.
Oh, for sure. And those races, they were a white-knuckle ride, man.
Every single one.
The sense of speed was intense. And then, we got to talk about the soundtrack. I mean,
Yeah.
come on, this game's soundtrack was fire.
Oh, yeah. Iconic, man. It was this perfect blend of hip-hop, rock, and electronic music, and it nailed the energy of that whole street racing scene.
Seriously, it wasn't just background music. It was part of the experience.
100%. It was like they curated this perfect playlist to get your heart racing, get you in the zone. You had The Game, Kanye West, The Crystal Method, The Prodigy. I mean, it was a who's who of amazing artists.
It was. And they all fit together so well.
It's true. They did. And the way they integrated the music into the gameplay, brilliant. Like the music would swell as you hit top speed, fade as you cruise through the city. It even changed dynamically based on how well you were doing.
It was like having your own personal DJ hyping you up during every race.
Exactly. And then on top of all that, you had the AI opponents to deal with. And these weren't like those predictable AI drivers from other racing games. The AI in Midnight Club 3, they were aggressive, man.
Yeah, they were unpredictable. They kept you on your toes, that's for sure.
Oh, yeah. In a lot of other racers, you could kind of figure out the AI's patterns, You could exploit them. But Midnight Club 3, Forget about it. These opponents, they'd cut you off, they'd use traffic to their advantage.
They'd ram you off the
Yeah, they're
road.
ruthless, man. They didn't make it easy.
Not at all. You couldn't just memorize the track and win. You had to adapt, think on your feet, react in real time, and they didn't hold back either. It didn't matter if you were driving a beat-up starter car or a high-end supercar. They came at you with everything they had.
Made every race feel like a real battle, a real test of skill.
Exactly. So we've talked about the open world, the insane customization, the intense racing, that killer soundtrack, and those relentless AI opponents. It's a lot to process, right?
It is.
So before we dive even deeper into, all the things that made Midnight Club 3 so special, I think it's worth taking a minute to, reflect. What does all of this tell us about this game? Why are we still talking about it all these years later?
That's a great question. I think it comes down to a few key things.
All right, I'm all ears. Lay it on me.
Yeah.
What makes this game so enduring?
Well, first off, Midnight Club 3, it just captured this specific moment in time. Like the early 2000s car culture, the cars, the music, the style. It's a time capsule.
Yeah, totally. It's like a portal back to that era. But it's more than just nostalgia.
Oh, absolutely. Midnight Club 3, it was innovative, too. I mean, they weren't afraid to push the boundaries, the open world, the level of customization they offered, just the pure intensity of the racing.
All of that, it was new.
It was. It pushed the genre forward. I mean, it's no exaggeration to say that a lot of racing games today, they still draw inspiration from what Midnight Club 3 did.
It set a new standard. I mean, it really did.
Yeah.
But it was more than just innovation and nostalgia, right?
Yeah.
Because Midnight Club 3, it also had this unique ability to make you feel, cool.
It did. It really did.
Like you're behind the wheel of these amazing cars, racing through these neon-lit cities, blasting this music that pumps you up. It's this power fantasy that, I don't know, it just clicks with players.
It totally does. It gave you this feeling of freedom, of rebellion. You were part of something exciting, something edgy. And that feeling, I think that's why people still look back on Midnight Club 3 so fondly. It wasn't just a game. It was an experience.
It was a total package. And it left a mark on the racing genre, a big one.
Yeah.
It really makes you think about what makes a game truly great,
You know, it's funny. When people talk about Midnight Club 3, they often focus on the cars, the customization, the soundtrack.
Yeah, all the flashy stuff.
Right. But one of the things that often gets overlooked is just how well designed those maps were. Like those cities, they weren't just empty spaces. They were crafted to, encourage exploration, to make you take risks, to reward creative driving.
That's so true. They felt so different from other racing games where it was just like a track you had to memorize. These cities felt alive.
Exactly. Each one was unique, not just in terms of, how it looked, but in how it played. Like take San Diego, for example. Those wide open highways along the beach, man, they were made for high-speed chases.
Oh, yeah. You just wanted to put the pedal down and fly.
Exactly. But then you had Atlanta with its tight corners, those urban canyons, and suddenly you had to change your whole approach. That city, it rewarded precision. It rewarded, those sweet, sweet drifting skills.
Oh, man, the drifting in this game. It was so good. It wasn't just like holding down a button,
Yeah.
You had to really work the car, feel that balance between control and chaos.
Totally. And then you had Detroit with its gritty industrial zones, those crumbling buildings. It felt like a completely different beast.
It did.
And you remember those crazy jumps in Detroit? Launching your car off those half-destroyed buildings, soaring through the air.
Oh, man, pure adrenaline.
It was. And each city, they were packed with these little details, shortcuts, hidden routes, alternate paths. It was like there was always something new to discover, a new challenge to conquer.
It totally rewarded you for exploring, for thinking outside the box. And speaking of thinking outside the box, we got to talk about those special abilities, right? Aggro, Zone, and Roar.
Oh, yeah. Those were game changers.
They added this whole other layer to the game, Like, suddenly it wasn't just about racing, it was about strategy, about knowing when to use these abilities to gain an advantage.
Right. And each ability felt so distinct. Like aggro, it was perfect for those big SUVs, those muscle cars. You could just barge through traffic.
Just plow through everything.
Exactly. And then you had zone, which was perfect for those tuned up sports cars, those exotics, slowing down time, letting you pull off these crazy maneuvers.
Yeah, using zone to thread the needle through a tiny gap or to pull off that last second overtake. So satisfying.
So satisfying. And then there was Roar, which, let's be honest, was mostly for the bikes. Pure chaos.
Unleashing that sonic shockwave, sending cars flying. It was awesome.
Totally. But the key was you had to use them strategically. You couldn't just spam them all the time. You had to think about like your car, the track, your opponents, and, the right moment to unleash that special something to give you the edge.
It was like you were conducting this orchestra of speed and aggression. And speaking of speed, we have to talk about the handling, man.
The handling in Midnight Club 3, it was special. It had that arcade-style feel. But there was also this, like, amazing sense of weight, of momentum that made each car feel real.
You could really feel the difference between, like, a lightweight sports car and a heavy muscle car. You know what I mean?
Oh, totally. And the drifting, it was pure joy.
It was like a dance.
Yes, this delicate balance between control and chaos. And when you hit that perfect drift, threading the needle through a corner without spinning out, it was just dot magic.
It was, and it's that attention to detail, that commitment to making the driving feel both, exhilarating and authentic that really elevates this game. But, we touched on the soundtrack earlier, and I think it deserves another shout out.
Oh, for sure.
Because it wasn't just like background music, it was the heartbeat of the game.
It was. The soundtrack, it was so carefully chosen to fit the game's atmosphere, to like enhance the emotions of each race.
Totally. And it wasn't just one genre either, right?
Yeah.
They had hip-hop, rock, electronic, even a little bit of industrial in there.
It was the perfect mix. And the way they integrated it into the gameplay was just genius. Like the music would swell when you hit top speed, fade in and out as you cruise through the city. It even changed dynamically based on how you were driving.
It was wild. It was like, in those old racing movies where the music would like speed up as the cars went faster.
Yeah, exactly. It was like having your own personal DJ in the game, hyping you up for every race.
Yeah.
And, some of those tracks, they just became synonymous with the game itself. I mean, to this day, whenever I hear the Crystal Method's Born Too Slow, I'm right back in Midnight Club 3.
Me too.
Yeah.
It's a great track. And it fit the game perfectly.
Yeah, it did. It really captured that energy, that rebellious spirit. But, it wasn't just the licensed tracks, the original score, the music composed specifically for the game.
Oh, yeah, by Traz Powell.
Yeah.
That was amazing, too.
It had this, like, blend of electronica, hip-hop, and industrial that just fit the setting perfectly.
It did. It added another layer of depth to the world. Like you weren't just racing through a city, you were experiencing it, feeling its pulse through the music.
They really nailed it with the soundtrack. No question about it. But, as much as we love this game, and we clearly do,
We do.
it's worth acknowledging that no game is perfect, right?
Right. Hey.
Were there any areas where you felt like Midnight Club 3 kind of stumbled?
Well, one of the things that people often bring up is, the rubber banding AI.
Oh, yeah, I remember that.
How it felt like your opponents would, like, magically speed up or slow down to keep the race close, no matter how well you were doing. Yeah, it can be frustrating at times. You'd think you had a comfortable lead, and then boom, suddenly your rivals are right on your tail.
Right. And it kind of felt like sometimes the game was forcing those close finishes, trying to manufacture that tension rather than letting the races just play out naturally.
Yeah, I get that. But to be fair, a lot of racing games back then had that same issue.
That's true. That's true. And to be fair to Midnight Club 3, it wasn't always super noticeable. Like, there were plenty of races where you could build a big lead and just cruise to victory. But then there were those other races, those nail-biters, where it felt like the AI was bending the rules just to keep things interesting.
Right. And then there was the difficulty curve. I love a challenge. But Midnight Club 3 wasn't afraid to push players to their limits.
It wasn't.
And sometimes it felt like it pushed a little too hard.
Especially in those later stages of the game. Some of those races against the rival crews, man, they were brutal.
They were. Even with a perfectly tuned car and, like, flawless driving, you could still get absolutely destroyed.
It was like you needed a PhD in Midnight Club 3 physics to beat some of those races.
Seriously. But I think, in a way, that difficulty is also part of what made the game so rewarding. When you finally conquered one of those seemingly impossible challenges, it felt like a legitimate victory. It felt earned.
Oh, absolutely. Midnight Club 3, it wasn't a game you could just breeze through. It demanded your focus, your skill, your patience.
You had to work for it.
You did. But when you overcame those obstacles, man, it was so satisfying.
It really was. So we've talked about the incredible open world, the deep customization, the intense racing, that unforgettable soundtrack, and even some of the areas where, the game maybe didn't quite hit the mark. But even with its flaws, I think it's clear that Midnight Club 3 left a lasting impact.
It did, no question. And that makes me wonder, what do you think is the biggest reason why people still love Midnight Club 3 all these years later? What is it about this game that continues to resonate with players?
It's a good question. I mean, we've seen a lot of racing games come and go over the years, but Midnight Club 3, it just sticks with you.
It does.
And I think a big part of that is, well, it wasn't just about going fast or looking cool.
Right.
There was this, surprising level of depth to it, especially when it came to, customizing your cars.
Oh, absolutely. The customization in that game, it was deep. It wasn't just about, throwing on the most expensive parts and calling it a day. You really had to understand how each upgrade impacted your car's performance.
Yeah, and we're not just talking about, basic stuff here. We're talking weight distribution, tire grip, gear ratios. I mean, it could get pretty technical.
It could, if you wanted to really squeeze every ounce of performance out of your car. You had to get into the nitty-gritty.
It was almost like a car tuning simulator hiding inside this crazy arcade racer.
Right.
I remember spending hours in the garage just tweaking and fine-tuning my setup.
Yeah, it was addictive.
It was. And when you finally nailed it, you took that perfectly tuned car out onto the streets and you just dominated.
Oh, man, the feeling was incredible.
It was. It made you appreciate the depths they built into this, seemingly straightforward arcade racer.
Totally. And it wasn't just about the parts themselves, right? It was about the way they all worked together, how each choice you made affected the car's overall balance and handling.
It was a system that rewarded you for, experimenting, for really understanding the mechanics.
Exactly. And that level of depth, it really shows you how much the developers cared about giving players, a personalized experience. They didn't just want to give you a bunch of shiny parts. They wanted you to create something unique, a car that was truly yours.
You really felt like you were building your dream car, piece by piece. It wasn't just a car you were driving, it was a car you created.
Yeah.
And that feeling, that sense of ownership, it added so much to the whole experience.
It did. You were invested in your car on a whole other level.
For sure. So we've talked a lot about what made Midnight Club 3 so great, but I'm curious, what do you think its legacy is? Why should gamers today, in a world of, hyper-realistic simulators and these massive open-world games, why should they care about this game from 2005?
That's a great question. I think Midnight Club 3, it serves as a reminder that games, they don't always need to be ultra-realistic or super complicated to be fun.
Yeah, sometimes the simple things are the best, right?
Exactly. Midnight Club 3, it knew exactly what it wanted to be, and it just went for it. It was over the top, it was stylish, it was a little ridiculous at times, but it was always a blast to play.
Pure fun, unadulterated fun. And it captured that spirit of, classic arcade gaming in a way that I think a lot of modern games have kind of lost.
I agree. So many games these days, they're so focused on being realistic or pushing the graphical boundaries or whatever that they forget about the core of what makes a game enjoyable.
It's true, but Midnight Club 3, it never forgot that.
Nope. It was all about giving you that pure, visceral thrill, that feeling of speed, that sense of freedom. And I think that's why it still holds up so well today.
Yeah, it's a reminder that sometimes all you need is a fast car, a killer soundtrack, and the city full of possibilities to have an amazing time.
And that's exactly what Midnight Club 3 gave us. It was a celebration of speed, style, and pure arcade adrenaline. And honestly, I think it feels just as fresh and exciting today as it did back in 2005.
I think so too. Well, that's about it for our deep dive into Midnight Club 3.
A true classic.
It is. Thanks for joining us on this trip down memory lane. Until next time, keep on racing.